You would go ahead and be turning to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. That's where we're going to be in our study of the Gospel of Matthew here this morning. Chapter 11 is on the back table along with the questions for 11. If you want to pick that up for Wednesday evening, you can pick that up off of the back table. But we're ready for Matthew chapter 10. We'll quickly go through our outline of the book and our chapter content. I will note as we get more into the book, we're getting a lot more chapters. It's easier right now because 3 of them are all the same thing. But we're starting to add a lot of chapters. So the further in we get, the less we're going to do the content review. We may do it every other chapter when we add them because it's going to start taking a lot of our class time if we spend all our time trying to review 28 chapters by the time we get to an end. Let's go through our outline of the book. Our outline we're using is the Faith Life Study Bible outline. We've got the prelude to Jesus' ministry in 1:1 to 4:16, Jesus' ministry in Galilee 4:17 to 16:20, and Jesus in Jerusalem 16:21 to 28:20. I'll quickly go through our chapters. We'll go through these in more detail on Wednesday. We'll go through them quickly here this morning. Chapter 1 is the genealogy and birth of the Messiah. Chapter 2, the Messiah as a child. Chapter 3, the forerunner of the Messiah. Chapter 4, the Messiah's temptation and early ministry. Chapters 5, 6, and 7, the Messiah preaches the Sermon on the Mount. Chapter 8, the Messiah performs miracles. In chapter 9, the Messiah performs more miracles. That is the section we are in. We are in here this morning. We are into chapter 10. Chronology of the life of Christ. We're in the third period still, the Great Galilean Ministry. As we mentioned, that's where we are. That's where we're going to be for quite a while, is that section on the Great Galilean ministry. That'll go through chapter 14, verse 12. We're ready for chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. The Messiah calls the 12 apostles and the limited commission. We'll talk more about that limited commission in a moment when we get to one of our questions here in a minute. But before we get to that, let's go through question number 1. Briefly summarize the chapter. What is Matthew chapter 10 all about?
The disciples, he sends them out. He gives them power to cast out demons, all manner of sicknesses, and tells them where to go and to stay with the people that stay at their house, and then that they would be told what to say and who to go to, and then did that when they would be.
Yeah, so he sends out the choosing of the 12, sending them out, giving them the power to cast out demons to prove that what they're saying is true. We'll talk more about that in a moment. They'll stay with those here that accept the message. They'll be told what to say, and if they do, they'll be approved. Let's go now to question number 2. Here's an overview of the outline of the chapter real quick. Jesus chooses and sends out the apostles, 1 to 15. The challenges they face in 16 to 33, and then the effect of their message in 34 through 42. Question number 2, what is the key verse of the chapter? Verse 16, behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. They're going out to teach the message, but they're going into a world full of wolves. They're going to be sheep. And so be wise as serpents, but harmless as doves. Let's go to question 3. What Old Testament passages are quoted or referenced in this chapter? Verses 35 and 36 are a quotation from Micah 7:6. For son dishonors father, daughter rises against her mother, daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own household. That's Micah chapter 7 and in verse 6. Verse 15, though not a direct quotation, and not even a direct reference to something the prophet said, but is a reference to two Old Testament cities in Sodom and Gomorrah. That'll be more tolerable for them in the judgment for those who reject the message. Again, we'll get to that more in detail in a minute. But he references those Old Testament cities. So here's our first point in our outline. Again, we mentioned this a moment ago in our overview, but section 1, Jesus chooses and sends out the apostles. So the first thing that happens is in verse 1, when he called his 12 disciples to him, he gave them power over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of diseases. Parallel accounts tell us that Jesus was doing what the night before? He was spending time in prayer before choosing the 12 apostles. It is interesting, perhaps this being the sequence of events. Let me take a side note real quick on the Gospels. The most literal gospel is in terms of order is the Gospel of Luke. Luke was a physician. Luke was an inspired writer. Luke was also an historian. So Luke is one who, as best he can, is going to try to put things in chronological order. That's why if you ever study a parallel of the Gospels, the book that you'll come to in sequential order most of the time is Luke, second most is Mark. Those are viewed to be the ones that are likely the most chronological. We do know that he talked about setting things in order when writing. He wrote both Luke and Acts, talked about setting those in order. So Matthew's not always chronological. Sometimes we come to an event in Matthew that in the Gospel of Mark is back-to-back events, and the Gospel of Matthew might be a few chapters apart. Sometimes they're grouped in order. He went to this side of the river, then he came to this side. Sometimes they're grouped almost by category, if you will, that here's a number of things that sort of fit in one sort of order here, that they're all still taking place in Galilee. They may not have been back-to-back days like it may feel in reading it, and an event that's 2 chapters later may have been around the same time frame, but they're kind of grouped off. I say all that to say this. Where did we end chapter 9? Pray ye that the Lord send forth laborers into the harvest. I don't know if the order is right after that, in actual chronological order, or it's the way it's recorded, but the very next thing is Jesus choosing men to what? Go out into the harvest. And so he called the 12 disciples to him. He gave them power over unclean spirits to cast them out, heal all kinds of sickness and disease. And then he's going to name the 12 and then give them what they're commanded. Let's read the names 2 through 5, or 2 through 4 rather. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these. First, Simon, who's called Peter, Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him. So, I'm not going to spend forever on each of these apostles. Some of them we know a lot about, not from here, but from other stories. We know a lot about Peter. The first 12 chapters of Acts are mostly following Peter. Peter wrote 2 books later on. We know about the event of Galatians 2 that take place shortly after Acts 15 with Peter that Paul writes about. We know a lot more about Peter. John did a lot of writings. John wrote the Gospel of John. He wrote 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. He wrote Revelation. Some of these men we know almost nothing about. There are 2 of them in particular, really, I guess 3 of them, we're going to focus on for just a second. Just a few things to note about them that we know less about. We know an awful lot about Judas as well, because Judas is the one that would betray Jesus. So we know a lot about some of them. We know almost nothing about other ones. Yes?
Read about Acts 8. I've heard him referred to as Philip the evangelist.
Yes.
Okay, so I can't remember, is he one of the ones chosen?
He's one of the 7 chosen in Acts 6. Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yeah, because I've done that to somebody clarified for me the fact that there are some things I can't remember what think about it. I thought there was a distinction between these 2.
Yeah, so in Acts 6, we've got the Hellenists coming about the tables. They're being neglected. The apostles basically say, we've got more important things we have to deal with from a spiritual standpoint. Let's choose 7 men that are qualified to serve over the table. Philip of Acts 8, again in Acts 21, as well as mentioned in Acts 6, is all the same Philip the evangelist there, the one that's not the apostle. So the apostle is mentioned in the apostles earlier. That Philip later on in Acts 6 that's chosen as one of the 7 is the same one of chapter 8, as well as chapter 21. There are some confusing ones. Ananias is struck dead. Then a man named Ananias comes to Saul of Tarsus. They're two different Ananiases, but they have the same name. We've got two James here. We've got Simon called Peter, and then Simon. There were some names that were repeated quite often in that day and time. Philip being one of those.
Judas is supposed to count one of them. A few Judas, I think. But one of them clarifies Judas.
Yes. And yes, I think that one of them does reference a Judas, a second Judas that also goes by another name. Some of these here, Lebbeus. When you learned the apostles as a kid, you didn't remember Lebbeus. That's because we know him as Thaddeus. So they'll go by multiple names. Which brings us to the ones we want to discuss. Two or kind of three I want to focus on. The first one is the one by the name of Bartholomew. Now, some of these men that are chosen as apostles, we don't really hear anything about before they're chosen as apostles. We hear some about after they're chosen as apostles. They're mentioned together and named at times, but we don't hear, Philip the apostle. We don't, there's some statements he makes that we can read, but we don't know as much about him in his work post-Pentecost and things. He's part of the apostles there doing the teaching, but Peter's sort of the one that's in the forefront. John, James, who's going to be put to death. Those are ones we remember. Now, Bartholomew, as far as we are aware at this point, now we know in Matthew we're not, but as far as we're aware in the gospel accounts, we don't know who Bartholomew is. I believe, now, you may disagree. I can't prove this necessarily one way or the other. You can't prove it the other way. We can't be decisive. I think this Bartholomew is likely Nathanael of John 1. He's mentioned alongside Philip. Nathanael's introduced in John 1. Remember, he's the one that says, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" And then, and he's there with Philip, who brings him to Jesus. He asks about anything good coming from Nazareth. Then he sees the signs, and he follows Jesus. Him and Philip together, I think that Bartholomew, it could be Nathanael. Can I prove that one way or the other for 100% certain? No. Does it really matter? Not really. They both follow Jesus. If they're two separate people or they're the same. The other one I want to mention is the second James. We're familiar with the first James. The first James is the son of Zebedee, the brother of John. The second James, here mentioned in verse 3, is called James, the son of Alphaeus. I think, and I have a lot more evidence for this than the other one, I think that's Matthew's brother. Go to Mark chapter 2 with me for just a minute. Mark chapter 2, we just read the calling of Matthew from Matthew's account the other day. Mark's account in Mark chapter 2 and in verse 14 says, "And he passed by, he saw Levi." Levi, Matthew, same person. He goes by that either name, just like Simon or Peter or Cephas. He saw Levi, the son of who? Alphaeus. Could it be two separate Alphaeuses? Could be. But being that they, again, are mentioned back to back, James is called the son of Alphaeus. Matthew called in Mark's account the son of Alphaeus. Perhaps, by the way, Matthew doesn't clarify he's the son of Alphaeus because perhaps his audience already knows who he is. And so he doesn't have to clarify who he is, but he clarifies on James this is his brother. Can we be 100% dogmatic about that? No. But I think it's likely they were brothers, which would mean out of the 12, you would have, if they are brothers, out of the 12, you'd have three pair of brothers. Peter and Andrew, the sons of Jonah. Remember Simon Bar-Jonah, that son of Jonah. You would have James and John, the sons of Zebedee. And you would have Matthew and James, the sons of Alphaeus. If they are brothers, I think they likely are, just based off that evidence, that are part of these 12. Again, some of these others we're not as familiar with. Those are some, the second James, you remember learning the song for little kids that he's called in the little kid song, I think he's called James, the one they call the less. He's the one we don't, he's really, I don't know why they call him the less, but he's the one that, if you will, he's less memorable in terms of we remember the other James for his statements with his brother, for being put to death. So we don't know as much about this James, though it seems he's Matthew's brother. Could be that he's the less and that he's the lesser known. Again, and particularly for us, we remember that James was put to death in Acts chapter 12. That's the son of Zebedee. We remember the James that would always go with Peter and John. That's John's brother, James. He was one of the 12. The 12 were all close with Jesus. It seems 3 of them went with him more than the others did to places, and that's Peter, that's James, the son of Zebedee, and John. So this James we know less of. Let's get to verse 5 to 15. Then the 12 Jesus sent out and commanded them, saying, "Do not go into the way of the Gentiles, and do not enter the city of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. Provide neither gold nor silver nor copper in your money belts, nor bag for your journey, nor 2 tunics, nor sandals, nor staffs, for a worker is worthy of his food. Now whatever city or town you enter, inquire who in it is worthy, and stay there till you go out. And when you go into the household, greet it. If the household is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And whoever will not receive you nor hear your words, when you depart from that house or city, shake off the dust of your feet. Surely I say to you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city." Number of things we want to hit on real quick. Let's get to these questions here. Questions 4, 5, and 6. Question number 4, what power was given to the apostles? Verse 1. To perform miracles. They could heal the sick, cast out demons. They could perform miracles. Question number 5. Why do we call this the limited commission? Mark 16 is the Great Commission. Why is this the limited? It's just to the Jews. The Great Commission. Remember this in the Great Commission. When Jesus tells them in Mark's account, in Mark chapter 16, he tells them this similar in Matthew, but in Mark chapter 16, verse 15, he says, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." Now, there might be a time until it would be that the Gentiles would come to God. That was Acts chapter 10. That was later on. But that message was for Jew and Gentile alike. At this point, the job is to go to just the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Question number 6. What was the content of their message to be? Verse 7. Same thing Jesus has been saying. Kingdom of heaven is at hand. There's our phrase, kingdom of heaven again. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's coming. It's near. And so you need to be ready. You need to be ready for that. They have the power, again, to cast out demons. He mentions in verse 8, he says, freely you've received, freely give. I think the point is, I've given you this power, not for you to keep to yourself, to go use, to show others that the message you're teaching is the truth. Provide neither gold nor silver nor bags, verses 9 and 10, for a worker is worthy of his food. That is, you're going to be receiving what when you get there? I think here's the point. You're going to be receiving support for preaching the message. You don't take it, the worker's worthy of his food. Those that when you come into are going to accept the message, look at verse 12, go into it. If the household is worthy, let your peace come upon it. And then if they're not, that's when you leave. If you go somewhere and people are accepting the message and accepting you, they will provide for you. That would happen often in the first century. Verse 11, whatever city or town you enter, inquire who in it is worthy. He's not saying, let's ask this question. What's he not saying? He's not saying go and choose who to speak to. Right, you can't be prejudiced. If he was, he's telling them only certain Jews you should choose are worthy. What he's telling them is when you go, I think what he's telling them is you look at it, inquire who is worthy. When you preach the message, the one that's going to accept the message and worthy, I think particularly for you to stay with and to provide you support, the one that's going to be receptive, that's going to become evident when you preach the message. And so those that are worthy are those that are accepting the message. That's where you stay with. Let's go to verse 14. If they do not receive it, then what are you to do? What are they to do? Verse 14. Shake off the dust of your feet. There comes a time, we need to try to teach everybody. We need to try to reach people. There are people in the Bible that are, if we were in a Bible class in the days of Saul of Tarsus and we said, who's a likely candidate? We said, name your top 100 likely candidates. I'd be shocked if Saul of Tarsus would have been on somebody's top 100 people they thought they could reach, even if they were very familiar with Saul. Very sincere man. He did what he thought was right. And he went on to preach the gospel and become a great asset to the early church. But people may not have viewed him as a candidate. Some of the other Pharisees may have been viewed as good candidates, but they were not receptive. We need to teach all men because we don't know who's going to be receptive, but there's going to come a time it's going to become apparent that some are just not going to listen, at least not right then. There's a time, here's a practical lesson for us. There's a time to shake the dust off your feet. There's a time where you have to say, they're not listening, I need to leave. Sometimes, by the way, you leave, and later on, they're more receptive. But there comes a time you have to make that acknowledgement. They may just not be, they may A, never be reached, or B, at least not be reached right now. There's time to shake off your feet and go somewhere else. Yes?
But after chapter 13, there chapter the word, he shook off the dust as testimony. Even though he wasn't here to receive this testimony, he didn't lack in anything or as how to navigate through this stuff and those that rejected it. But he is kind of ironic. He wasn't even there, but he got the message somehow, and he actually did this as a testimony against him.
Yes, and you're right. And again, as you mentioned, he's not behind them anyway. He's an apostle too. We know later on, he's not any bit behind the others as an apostle. So somehow you're right. He had that command. Yes.
Asked me how sheep. Their weapons were not like swords and guns and stuff. They were not formed weapons. So you see that you go out and access the power of salvation is in the Word of God, and that's what.
You're right. We can't go out as people before. Sometimes I wish I could drag people kicking and screaming to the front pew and make them do what was right. But you can't. And we can't force people to do what's right. And that's what they were doing here, acknowledging that with the shaking off the dust.
Big name, quote unquote, religion, that their weapons are definitely carnal. You watch the news like you may see it sometimes. Fruition, because there's big name religion that they do believe it's physical.
Yes.
I have a question for you. The first one here. We have time here. It says, house where they let your peace come upon it, and if it's not, where they let your peace return to you. And also, he goes on saying, just what we're talking about, whoever will receive you, or will not receive your words. What's the two differences between those?
I think as you talk about the peace coming upon it and the peace returning, perhaps there's a reference to the fact to the message itself is going to bring peace. If they're not going to listen, that peace is coming back to you. You go take it. And the dusting off feet, you go somewhere else with it. So the peace returns to you. Obviously not that you preach the message and you can't take peace somewhere else. But they're not going to, the peace is upon those that listen to it, right? We're strived to be found by him in peace. If they don't listen, that peace returns to you. You take it. To those that don't hear, you depart from that house, or if it's the whole city, to the city and shake off your feet because they're not going to listen. Take that peace somewhere else to somebody that is going to listen. I think that's the point he's making, is it's going to return to you and you go take it somewhere else because they're the ones, going back to what he said before, they're not worthy of it in the sense that they're not going to accept that message in verse 13 and 14.
Lucky blessed men felt at first. They were told they were supposed to do something that wasn't going to be wrong. Those things, Old Testament, so much. Sacrificing all that too, just putting God first, and doing what God wants you to do. That. And then moving under the Spirit, healing the sick, becoming more focused on my future majesty.
You're right, and I think as you go to the parallel accounts too, and I think there's something significant in this. Jesus didn't send them out one by one; he sent them out as a group, two by two. I think there's a couple significant things in the sending out two by two. One, two going together can do twice the work in one city. The second thing is they were never alone. They always would know that somebody was with them to stand for what was right. Yes.
About this, people and stuff, you move on. You don't quit. You think, as a minister, you probably preach hard about certain things. Here, they don't. It's on. You can't get free, you think. So, he actually fed 5,000 people, besides women and children. And the next day, he started talking about, let me give you some spiritual food now. They walked away. Jesus didn't quit. And there's a lesson in that for both these men.
You're right. There's a time, and I think that's where we have to draw where the balances come in. There's a time to dust off your feet, but that doesn't mean you quit. Sometimes you circle back around after dusting off your feet. Sometimes the people you leave will come back to you. It just may depend. We've only got a few minutes left, so I want to get to 16 to 26. So real quick, we got about 3.5, 4 minutes left. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get into this next section in 16 to 26. This 16 to 30 is the whole section, but 16 to 26 is our next subsection. We're going to finish what we don't do today on Wednesday, and if we've got time, we're going to start chapter 11, at least the beginning of 11. So you need to pick up chapter 11 already to have that for Wednesday, just in case we get there. Let's go to verse 16 now. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues. You'll be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in the hour what you should speak. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father who speaks in you. Now brother will deliver up brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but he who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in the city, flee to another. For surely I say to you, you will not have gone through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is not enough for a disciple that he be like his teacher and a servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they call those of his household? Therefore do not fear them, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. Let's go back to verse 16. We don't have time to cover all of this. So this whole section is challenges they'll face, and we're focusing right now on section A, persecution, in 16 to 26. So he told them first, our key verse, verse 16, you are sheep in the midst of wolves. You're going to go out as sheep, but you're going out among ravenous wolves. Wolves will kill sheep. So you've got to be careful. Not careful in that you're restraining the message. Careful in the sense that you realize it's dangerous out there for preaching the word, but you're still going to go anyway. Beware of men, for they'll deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues. I think of Acts chapter 4 and Acts chapter 5 specifically. In Acts 4, Peter and John have healed that lame man in chapter 3. They preach a lesson because everybody marvels. Peter preaches this. We call Acts 2 the first gospel sermon. First in the sense the first post-Christ death, burial, resurrection. If that's the first, Acts 2 is the second. Maybe not in sequential order. There would have been more before, but second, and that's what's recorded for us. And then after preaching that sermon, the council drags Peter and John in. They tell them, do not preach in the name of Jesus. The men leave. They go to their companions. Some say the church. I think the apostles. Regardless, the other apostles would be there. But I think they go just to the other apostles and say, here's what happened. And while they're there, they pray for boldness. The very next chapter, they're preaching the same message, all 12 of them. So Judas is gone. Matthias has replaced him at this point in Acts 5, are taken and drug in for preaching it. They're brought before the synagogues. They're brought before the councils. You'll be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. And so you're going to be brought before governors and kings. Some of these, Peter's eventually put to death after the persecution begins under Nero. Okay, tradition says, we don't have it recorded for us biblically, but history and tradition tells us Peter was put on a cross. Like Jesus, tradition also tells us in history that Peter refused to die as the Lord did and actually was hung upside down. Paul later on, he's not an apostle here, but he is an apostle, made an apostle later on. Paul is also going to go before the king and be put to death. James is put to death by Herod. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. We need to be ready always, 1 Peter 3:15, to give a defense for what we believe. But sometimes in giving a defense, we have to say, give me a minute. You know, if you're getting ready to give a defense and somebody says you're giving a defense of all the gospel, while you may be able to give a good defense of most of it, you might have to say, give me a minute to get my thoughts and my notes together. They didn't. They were told by the Spirit what to say, and they would give a defense, verse 19 and 20. Wednesday, we're going to pick up in the same section. We'll review the first part, finish the chapter. We may only get through chapter 10, but again, go ahead and fill out the questions for 11 and be ready in case we get there on Wednesday. When my soul